Greetings, my dear audience. Welcome to the very first episode of Speaking Stars on the Dear Paarijaat podcast show. Our guest needs no introduction today, but let me paint a picture for you. We have the privilege of chatting with the visionary founder of TNG Media and the Nudge Group, the CEO of Balance the Grind, and the talented host of Give It a Nudge show, the one and only Steve Grace. In this episode, get ready for a roller coaster of insights covering key topics like fundraising, time management, entrepreneurship traits, adapting to a dynamic business environment, the art of marketing, and talent recruiting. It's a conversation packed with wisdom and experiences that you won't want to miss. So without further ado, let's jump right into the brilliance that is Steve Grace's journey.
So, greetings, sir. Today, I, Mayank Gangwar, the host of Dear Paarijaat podcast show, would like to have you on the show as a guest. So, today we are beginning with the questions. The first question is to you is, how has the Nurse Group successfully navigated the challenges of operating in international markets?
It's a good question. It's quite challenging, I think, operating in international markets at the moment because there's a lot of disparity in terms of, I guess, COVID changed everything, right? In that, if you looked at the world before COVID, countries tended to operate very siloed, and they tended to have the staff in those countries, unless they had maybe an outsourced model. And they almost, so India would work with the Indian guys, Singapore would work with Singapore, London would work with London. Now it's become far more completely global. So I think startups have got to learn, and I think the hardest thing is probably the time zones, to work collaboratively as a global business, as opposed to 5 or 6 different businesses in different countries trying to sort of go towards a common strategy. And I think that's a different way of thinking, a different way of working. And you've got to allow for cultural differences. You've got to allow for time zones. These are things that people didn't necessarily have to think about as much before. So we've seen a big change. And for us as well, like we obviously have an office in Singapore, we have an office in London, and we operate all over the world. My days changed a lot. So whereas I would have had sort of a start and a finish, the way that I kind of do it now is I have different periods of the day when I work, but I also have periods of break when I work. Otherwise, I'd have no break. I'd be working all the time. So now I'm kind of like, I might get up super early and do some meetings, and then I might go to the gym for 2 hours and have some breakfast, and then I might come back and work here, and then, and then I might go and hang out with the kids or have dinner, and then I'd be working again later. So my day is sort of broken into segments. I think that's probably the biggest change.
Definitely, time management is a very keen thing for an entrepreneur to focus on. Yeah,
100%.
going forward to our next, yes, sir. Going forward to our next question. How do you see the intersection between work-life balance and the success of startups at Balance the Grind?
Great question. So Balance the Grind, as you know, is an online publication trying to help people understand how to manage their life better. I don't know if you saw, but this week we had an article on work-life balance in India, because work-life balance in India is suddenly changing. If you go back even 2-3 years, work-life balance wasn't really a thing at all. And finally, you've got this scenario where you've got Indian companies that are not finding it as easy to hire people or not finding it easy to hold on to people, and the workers getting a bit more power, and the younger generation are wanting a little bit more work-life balance. And I think it's a great thing. And I think and it's not just India, it's pretty much the whole of Asia. The whole of Asia is suddenly going into a time where they've got some power to create work-life balance, which is awesome. Now, how do you relate that to startups and entrepreneurs? I think it's really important that entrepreneurs don't just go all out all the time, which is the traditional model. If you look back at the 90s or the 2000s or whatever, that doesn't work. You burn out and your work productivity goes down. I think there are periods of time where you do work crazy hours, and it might be for a week, it might be for a month, it might even be for 2 months. But then you have to balance that with times where you are giving yourself normal working hours, time to decompress, time off. I think in reality, if you really want to perform at your best, you need sleep and you need exercise. So if you can get those as much as you can, you'll find that your performance levels are here. And even though you may not be working as many hours, you're achieving more. But at the same time, there will always be periods where you just have to work all the time. That's unfortunately the life of a startup. You just need to make sure you're not doing that for very, very long periods of time, because what happens then is that the quality of you and everything in your decisions goes down, which ultimately is a bad thing.
Yes, sir. We need to also pay attention on the health while focusing on a business and on entrepreneurial life. It's played a kind role in it. Sir, what challenges have startups faced when expanding into new markets, and how does TNG help overcome them?
So I think the hardest thing, if you look, well, there's a lot of different challenges, right? But if you look at it from a TNG point of view, as in the media company that we have, I think the hardest thing when you're going into a new market is nobody knows you. So, for example, when the Nudge Group launched, we got very well known in Australia quite quickly. It's a small population. The startup was quite small. You go into Singapore, no one knows who you are. You go into London, even less people know who you are. So I think that from what TNG does as a company, because there's a lot of different things that you need to do, and what TNG does is it helps you tell your story through different media outlets to get your brand known. I think brand awareness when it comes to selling your product, when it comes to hiring people, or when it comes to having credibility is the number one thing you have to have. So TNG as a company is focused around giving them the opportunity to tell their story through a YouTube show, through the Balance to Grind website, through podcasts, through a whole bunch of other things to enable them to give themselves credibility so that one, people will actually look at their product, and two, people will work for them. So that's the main thing TNG does, I guess. There's a lot of different challenges in going to a new market, but TNG is very focused on storytelling, I think. Storytelling is the key to getting people to buy your brand.
Yeah, definitely, sir. So, what advantage does the Nudge Remote Services offer to startups aiming to build diverse and global teams?
Right. So yeah, I mean, I think Nudge Remote was designed to enable companies to hire people offshore without the necessarily need of going through an outsourced company. You know, there's been a lot of problems with outsourced companies. There are so many outsourced companies, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about India, Philippines, Malaysia, Fiji, Eastern Europe, you know, whichever country it is that you're potentially looking at for a talent pool of people. If you're using outsourced companies, because there's so many, it's very hard to know what the working conditions are. Are they actually getting paid what they should be? Well, you know, there's a whole plethora of different problems. So the idea of Nudge Remote was to really remove that and give them the transparency to employ people directly. So we would find those people for them, but they would have them working for themselves. So they would really have complete control over their conditions, over what they got paid, over their promotions, over their working hours, and enables them to bring them into the culture of themselves rather than having, this is our business and then that's our outsourced team. The idea is to bring them together and work as a group, make them feel like they belong as much as they do, and really give the owners of the business the transparency to know that they are getting what they want and they are getting paid what they need to be paid. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir, very definitely. We are also a publishing company here, so we outsource our publishing work many a time. So there are many problems and obstacles which we face. So I can really relate with that.
Yeah, it's a tricky space.
Yeah, definitely, sir. So here's another question to you. How has the startup ecosystem evolved over the past 3 years, and how has TNG adapted to these changes?
I think probably that's a massive question because in the last 3 years, one, the startup ecosystem has exploded, right? The whole world wants to have a startup. Everyone's got a side hustle. You then had a period, 2.5 years ago, where the whole world was awash with money. VCs had incredible volumes of cash to give out, and they were giving them to everybody, which was crazy. And valuations were going through the roof, and people were having, I guess, unrealistic expectations of what their company was worth and how good they were at running a business, when ultimately all they were doing was really spending somebody else's money. And then a sort of reality came in, maybe 18 months ago, where suddenly the money dried up and it was much harder to obtain funding, meaning that if you didn't or hadn't built a genuine business that had real value, you were going to go under. So we saw this real spike over 3 years of massive boom and then massive bust. And then now it's sort of come back up to the middle and it's sort of traveling along. And I think now, if you've got a business that has a road to profitability, like it doesn't have to be profitable now, but as long as there's a genuine plan to get there, then you can still get funding, you can still grow, and you can still be successful. And I think that was the change. I think there was just this madness of everyone was just spending money with no care in the world about ever becoming profitable. And then obviously they got caught out. So been a bit of a roller coaster the last 3 years, but I think now it's sitting where it should sit. And I think we've got a much more healthy ecosystem, and we've got a much larger ecosystem, and we've also got a whole, I guess, generation of founders who've seen both a boom and a bust. Whereas prior to that, no one had really seen a bust before. So you've got these founders who've got a far better education in how to run a much more high quality business.
Yeah, because the planning is the most proper aspect of the. If you have a good plan, then your business will survive in the longer run. You might have the lesser profit in the beginning, but yeah, at the end we only get the good stage, good level. So, what advice
Yeah.
do you have for startups looking to connect with VC and private equity firms as facilitated by the Nudge Group?
So I think this is a question that gets asked a lot. I think if you're going to go and ask anyone for money, and let's split it into two because they're quite different, right? So let's start with VCs. If you're looking to get introduced to a VC, you really need a reason as to why you're after that money. And I don't mean I'm running out of money. That's not a reason. So I think I think far too many founders sort of get to a point where they go, you know what, I've got this idea and I'm running out of money. I need to go and raise money. That's you need to have a genuine plan as to why you're asking for money now. Was it in the plan? What are you going to do with that money? And then what difference is that going to be from where you are now? And then when are you going to need money again? You know, you need that long-term plan. I think way too many founders just come up with an idea. They see if someone will buy it. If someone buys it, they go, right, I'm going to go and raise loads of money and hire lots of people. Hiring lots of people isn't always the right thing. Now, I shouldn't say that as a recruiter, but it's not always the right thing. But I think too many people just haven't really thought it through. You've got to know your market. You've got to know why you've done what you've done. You've got to know what you're going to do and why you're doing what you're doing and what are going to be the results of that. Not just, I'm out of money. So that's sort of VCs. And so many people don't, right? And then from a private equity point of view, so private equity is really, you know, it's the route to exit. So again, it's got to be, okay, well, why are you looking to exit? Are you looking to sell the business because it's out of your control or you feel out of your depth as a founder? Are you looking to exit the business because you're getting older? Are you looking to exit the business because you want a lot of money? Again, exiting the business because you want a lot of money, it's not an argument that works very well with private equity. You need to have identified a way for that business to really, really capitalize on what the opportunity is and either not have the funds or not have the, and more often than not have the business sense to take a business that big. You know, a lot of founders are great at the beginning, but they're not when they get to a certain size. That's the right time to sell. So again, it's really having genuine reasons. I think there's way too many people out there that just think, I'm going to start a business, people are going to give me all this money, I'm going to hire all these people, and then I'm going to sell it to private equity, and I'm going to go and retire. It happens in the movies, doesn't really happen in real life. So
how has the pandemic influenced the base startup approach, talent recruitment, and building remote teams?
So yeah, this is probably the biggest change. I've been in recruitment for 25 years, which makes me sound really old. But the biggest change I've seen in recruitment, and just to give you some context around that, when I started working in recruitment, there was no email. So we used to fax resumes over and resumes used to get posted to us like it was a long time. So that was a big change. But I think really the biggest change I've ever seen happen was the pandemic in that, you know, from a perspective of interviewing candidates, if I go pre-pandemic, I'd probably done maybe 5 to 10 video interviews. Everything else had been face-to-face. Now, 99.9% of videos are all interview, which has enabled people to hire people remotely. And I think people are comfortable doing that. They're comfortable talking on video and they're comfortable hiring people in remote places, which just was not an option. People would never have done that. They would have had massive trust issues. So what it's done from a startup perspective, particularly in places like the United States, where they've got huge pools of talent across massive areas, and India as well, right? It's enabled them to hire people that they would never have had access to. So it's given them a far greater talent pool. It's given them the ability to potentially employ more people in certain roles that are lower skilled or lower wage and spend more money on people that are the higher skilled. It's really just given them flexibility. And I think it's given them the ability to hire a much more intelligent and structured workforce. Yeah, I mean, pretty much the last part of it that I was going to say was, I think that founders and entrepreneurs now have probably got the greatest opportunity they'll ever have or have ever had to hire talent across the world at a reasonable price and not be sort of, I guess, constrained by their location. You know, Sometimes founders were struggling because there just wasn't the talent in their local village, town, city, whatever it is. Or sometimes they just couldn't afford that. I think those problems are now gone. I think you can hire amazing talent all over the world, and you can build a kick-ass team, whether you are cashed up as an entrepreneur or whether you are beginning at the person and running it on a shoestring. I think it's the best opportunity ever to hire really high-quality people. I think it's great.
Yes, sir. So as an entrepreneur, with a diverse set of roles, how do you manage your time and priorities effectively?
Good question. Yeah, I have 4 companies now and 2 children, although they're teenagers now, so although they're just as painful actually. But how do I prioritize my time? I really look at each sort of Sunday night is my key time. I will never go out on a Sunday night. My Sunday night is where I sit there and I go, okay, this is what I want to do this week. How am I going to do that? I look at my diary. If things aren't working out, I'll move things around, and I make sure I do things in chunks. I think the key thing I see and the key problem I see with a lot of entrepreneurs is jumping from one thing to another. I think the key thing is to say, right, I'm going to do that for that period of time, and then I'm going to do that for that period of time. And even though you can't necessarily have a sole focus, you can have focus on sole things for periods of time with little breaks in between, and you'll get through loads. If you try and do a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, what happens is your brain never really gets anywhere and you don't achieve a lot. So for me, it's always about saying, right, this is what I need to do this week. This is how I'm going to fit it in. This is how I'm going to block it into my diary. And then you have to stick to that. And no matter what people say, you just have to say no, or I can't do it. And you just have to be brutal. And I think sometimes the hardest thing about managing your time is saying no to people. It's quite difficult, but you'll definitely reap the rewards if you say no and you stick to your plan and you make sure you achieve what you want to achieve. It sounds simple. It's not simple. It's really difficult, but it's a simple answer, hard to execute.
The scheduling and time managing and saying no for being brutal, it is very difficult thing for everyone. Like, but yeah, it is fruitful at the
Yeah.
end for us. So, sir, could you
Absolutely.
recommend someone you believe would be an excellent person to be an interview?
Look, there's a couple of different. I mean, I know 400 founders, 50 VCs, 25 private equity guys, so many different people. I think, I mean, I can probably give you a list of people, but I think ultimately you probably want to try and get some people who come from a variety of backgrounds. You know, as you know, I have my own podcast, and I try and keep it, I try and sort of do it this way. I try and have a founder, and then I try and have someone with money, so either VC or private equity, and then I try and have a provider, so like a lawyer or an accounting firm, and then I go back and keep looping around, because you get 3 very different views of the ecosystem that way. And I can give you people in all of those spaces. I'm happy to email those to you, no problem at all.
Yes, sir. We would be happy to know about it. Please recommend for us.
All right, last question, hey?
So finally, is there any specific message, announcement, or piece of advice you would like to convey to our audience or the startup community at a large?
I think the greatest piece of advice I've probably had given to me is that everything takes a lot longer than you think. And the only time you fail is when you give up. So I think that when you're building a business, you know, you can run out of money, but you can still chip away at the side by working in another role. You can have massive setbacks, but you can still jump up and keep going. And I think have realistic expectations. I think most founders, when they start, including me, and I've done this, you know, I've had goodness knows how many companies. You always believe you're going to achieve this much in your first year, and you won't. You'll probably achieve this much. And then you think you're going to achieve this much in your second year, and you'll probably achieve this much. But then in your third year, you end up achieving that much. You know, it takes those first few years of real foundations to have those massive wins. And those massive wins come, but they only come if you don't give up. And I think the key thing is, you know, don't over expect. Know that it's going to take time to build the foundation. If you build the foundation, then that big win will come. It always does. But if you try and go for the big win first, we've seen it, right? What happens is you get the big win and then it all just collapses in a heap. It's just like a house. You need to have the foundations. You need to build. You need to make sure you build it correctly. You need to make sure you have the right plan and marketing strategy and product strategy and all those strategies to what's going to happen, because you're going to need those when you go and raise money as well. And you just keep chipping away at it. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you got a house. It really is that way.
Definitely, sir. Giving up should not be in the to-do list if you want to success. So yeah, concluding for today. Hope you have a great life, good success. Thank you, sir, for being on this interview.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
At the wrap up, this engaging episode of Speaking Stars with Steve Grace, we hope you found inspiration in the key topics discussed. If you enjoyed the conversation, consider sharing it with your network. Also, if you have burning questions or specific topics you would like us to cover in the future episodes, feel free to reach out. You can mention us on social media, DM or email your questions. All the details are in the episode description. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Until next time, keep reaching for the stars. Thank you.